Piyush, what part of the success would you attribute to the change of culture? How did the culture evolve? You have 5 beautiful values. How did you pick them up? Was it consulting with strategic partners or advisors? They look very dynamic, not the typical ones that you're going to see on every other bank.
So I guess there are 2 questions in there. So the first one is, what has changed in the DBS culture and how has it helped? In my first few months when I came to DBS, I sort of diagnosed that there's one part of DBS culture which I like a lot and one part of DBS culture which will definitely need shaking up. The part that I liked a lot was this sense of, I call it collaboration, but it's not a political company. And therefore, unlike most other companies, people are generally willing to work with each other for a common good. So that's good. Well, the 2 things I didn't like. One I didn't like is the downside of this willingness to work together is you often compromise for mediocrity. So it is easy to confuse collaboration with mediocrity because you don't want to surface issues because you all want to be nice to each other. And so you sweep things under the carpet. Right. So that's the downside of collaboration if you don't actually get people to engage in a more honest way about collaboration. The second thing which I didn't like was we are a very risk-averse culture. We're a classic Singapore government machine, right? So, kiasu, the fear of taking risks, which means you are process-bound and policy-bound. And the processes and policies have been crafted to protect the bank, to do the right thing, etc., etc. But the sense of individual accountability and individual enterprise and individual ownership, the willingness to, take a risk and do something by yourself, DBS didn't have a lot of that. So in the early couple of years, my big agenda was how do I keep the nice part of DBS, but marry it with this sense of individual enterprise. It is okay to take a few risks. It's okay to do things. It's okay to question stuff. And to do that, frankly, I wasn't conscious. We sort of worked our way back into it, but it turned out that using this platform of customer experience and making this central to what we're trying to do, so process mapping and so on, but fundamentally empowering people, saying if it's okay and improves the customer experience, is probably a good thing for you to go ahead and take a risk with. Right? So that was very helpful too. So when you ask me what is the biggest outcome we've had from a culture shift, I think we made a substantial shift in the context of making people willing to do stuff. And that's really dramatically changed our thinking around putting the customer first. So a large part of our policy framework, a large part of what we want to do, whether cycle times, turnaround, people are willing to do things because it helps the customer. And that outcome, we rated number 1 in Singapore now 2 out of the last 3 years for the quality of our customer service. We used to be last in Singapore. That change, which is this focus on trying to assure good customer outcomes, that has been a function of this culture shift, right, if you will. The other part of the question you asked is, how do you get to these 5 pieces of culture? We didn't do that the first couple of years. Right? And we didn't do that because, I was concerned about coming out with a new mnemonic or a new set of words and thrusting them down the organization. Organizations have got to feel real about, what they're all about. So we did that exercise only, a couple of years later. And to do that exercise, I figured what would be a good way to do it is to really reach out into the organization and ask people what they felt. So we conducted hundreds of workshops in every country with 2 questions. One is, what do you think really defines the soul of DB? What are we about? What do you think is unique about us relative to other companies? The second is, what do you think we should have that we don't, that will allow us to be a better firm and compete better? And so we got a lot of input from a lot of people. We put that in a bunch of this thing. We used that and created a short list of some ideas that trickled through the organization. We then sat together, 30 people, and sifted through all of these and say, what are people telling us? That what is true about us and what needs to be true about us? And so we went through a process of short testing and so on. We came up with 7 or 8 big ideas for what people think really personifies us today But people also think, hey, we're not there, but we need to be this if we're going to succeed. Then we went back to the organization. We used an online tool, 3-4 day tool called a Values Jam. So we did a 3-4 day technology, this thing where we engaged online and we floated all of these again, saying, look, when we sussed them out, these seem to be big ideas. What do people feel about that? And we, got ideas from people, how they related to the word, what they thought was appropriate, why they thought it was important. And we sort of got back together and sussed that out and bring work with that. And that's how we finally came up with these 5 big ideas. To be fair, it was a lot of bottoms up, but it was also a lot of top down. The management team, 20 people plus another 10, we locked ourselves up in Sentosa for a couple of days to work with this and say, so what does this mean about us? How would it relate to how we compete? How would it relate to the kind of company we are? We had a couple of sessions that, hey, you want to be this. And we say, you know what, this doesn't ring true to the kind of company we are. We'll never be able to own this. So we've got to try and figure things that we can really own, which will resonate with people. So you think about the way you define our values now, this thing about being purpose-driven. It is the number one thing that came out from the company in both what we should be, but also what we probably are. And that was very interesting to me because a lot of purpose.
Sense of purpose.
Sense of purpose. And it was really, I never thought about it. It came back and I started understanding why it is so important to people in DBS. It's enshrined in our roots. We go back to DBS's formation. DBS was created from EDB to help in the development and growth of Singapore. The people who've been around 40 years and people who did this thing have that sense of mission. That, we were created to help Singapore grow. And so our job is not to make money. Our job was to create Singapore. Our job was to create something and make something better in this country. When we acquired the Postal Savings Bank in the late 90s, we acquired an institution which was 135 years old, but it is the institution for the common man in the street. And so a lot of people who came from that always had this thing about, our job is to inculcate the savings habit among Singaporeans. That's why we were created. Right? And it became quite clear to me that this whole sense of we are bigger than just, shareholder profit or shareholder value is deeply ingrained in the psyche of our people. So for us, it's a short step to make sure that having a clear understanding of what is our purpose going forward and making sure it's deeply embedded in the company is not as challenging as it is for many other companies because people feel that's what defines us, that's what created us and it's deeply rooted in the company.